Hey everyone, welcome back to KITHYM Art, where we draw fan art of the D&D monsters and learn a few tricks along the way. In the last episode we drew the Basilisk Infant and talked a bit of how to create a fuller scene using the traits of a creature. In this episode number 5 we're going to be drawing a few creatures, the Chwinga. Now, Chwinga are described as tiny elementals that inhabit areas that are welcoming to their element. The Chwinga come in a variety of appearances and are usually foreshadowed by the pleasant smell of flowers, quiet animal noises, or other tranquil ambience. Chwinga are peaceful creatures, taking a deep curiosity in whatever appeals to their nature. A knight in shining armor, a tall barbarian, even the sound of a traveler's voice can be appealing to the Chwinga, attaining a magical boon if the traveler is so lucky. The Chwinga are anywhere from 6 inches to a foot tall. So in my reference picture we have a few people sitting around a campsite, which I think will do well for showing off the different elemental types of Chwinga we can potentially see. So let's get to it. I'm going to start by drawing the floor of this. I know in the last episode the audio had a bit of an issue where things were fast forwarded, so I didn't really get to describe this part, but all that I'm doing is drawing a bit of an oval shape where I want the floor roughly to be. So everything is going to be grounded on this area. And then now I'm going to go ahead sorry, now I'm going to go ahead and draw the center where the fire is going to be. And then where I want one of them to be, another one more, and then the last one. So something as simple as this is just blocking out where the, I guess, pieces of the scene are going to be, and to keep everything grounded, as I said before. So whenever we draw the bodies of these people, these creatures, we know where they're going to be standing upon. So we know what places we don't want to draw over or have too much overlap, and we're giving plenty of space between them. So I'm going to go ahead and start left to right in this scene, and I'm going to use my paper trick just to go ahead and cover up so I don't smudge anything on the way. Now the first Chwinga I have over here going to be kicking back, lounging. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle shape for the face and the cross technique to figure out where the features are going to be, roughly. So Chwinga are, being that they're so small, we're going to use chibi proportions, which is usually about 3 heads high. So the torso is about the same size as the head, as well as the hips are about the same size as the torso, and then the legs and knees are a bit smaller. Okay. And for the chairs or the ground they're going to be sitting on, I'm going to give them a bit of, let's say, stumps. I think that'll do very well to show the fact that they're nature spirits. And I'm just going to roughly do a bit of a cylinder shape you can see I'm doing here, and then kind of go ahead and detail that out just a little bit, not getting too carried away because we're barely starting the scene. So okay, and you can see I already have the first one kind of lounging here. Maybe he's leaning back on like a stem or something, so let's go ahead and do that too. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and time lapse a bit, and I'll talk about what I'm doing for the rest of the characters in this scene, just to get things going. Okay. So now coming back, we can see that we have our scene blocked out. And again, I followed the same proportions roughly for all of them, but it's going to be the features that are going to give more the personality to these Chwinga. And you can see I kept it pretty consistent with having the head be the same size as the torso, same size as the lower body, and then the knees and feet are roughly the same distance as the torso, but just split apart in these sections. So we can now see how allowing ourselves to have this space when drawing these circles on the floor allows us to know, exactly where these creatures are going to be taking up space and not to have any overlap. And you can also see how I drew this circle a bit closer to this one, and I have it pushed back now after drawing, because I could see that it's going to kind of interfere with the detail on this guy, and I don't want that. So a bit more information on this. When blocking out a scene, as I've said before, it's really helpful to just do things in the simplest of forms and whatever comes in the foreground first. So you might have noticed I started with this guy on the left just to get an edge of where the boundary of the scene is going to be, and then I did this one in the middle because I know he's going to be in front and center, so anything else is going to be behind him I'll do afterwards, since I know exactly where I can draw them without it interfering too much. And then finally just closing up the scene on this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and add the bit of the shapes and flesh out these characters a bit more in time lapse, and we'll come back after that. Okay, these characters are a bit fleshed out. Now we can see the depth of their bodies and a bit of the volume that we're going to be using for their poses. I do want to mention, and I think I've said this quite a bit of times, but it just stresses the importance of it, anatomy. So one simple thing about anatomy, or at least two things that I can say, is that whenever drawing a character or a creature, the elbow will usually and most often line up with the center of where the torso is, or the navel, the belly button. So this is a bit of a rough guideline, so even drawing chibi characters, we can keep it in proportion and looking somewhat natural. And again, the shoulder to the elbow is the same length as the elbow to the wrist. So again, we can have this proportion here and see how things come out pretty even though their bodies are a bit deformed. Even for this guy in the center, we can see roughly that his elbow lines up with his waist, and then this one too with the waist, and so on. And we can see that, once again, even though these creatures are going to be a bit of a chibi, which means that their body is small relatively in proportion to their head, they still look natural in a way. So let's go on and time-lapse a bit more so we can go ahead and clean up and figure out where our details are going to go. Oh, also one last thing. Being that there's 5 characters in this scene and they're all based on different elements, our Chwinga can be any one of the element combinations. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little note, and just kind of to myself to have an idea of who's going to be what. So let's say this guy in the middle is going to obviously be the campfire, so I'm put a little F here. We want someone to be Earth, and maybe it's going to be this guy that's just chilling over here back there. And then we're going to have air perhaps be a bit more aloof. And we definitely want water and grass to be more away from the fire a little bit, so that'll make sense to make this guy probably grass, and this one that's uncomfortable would be water. So going from there, we're going to leave that note to ourselves so that when we start blocking out, we can determine what elements and what effects are going to go where. It's just something to keep in mind. If you do this mentally in your own head, then that's even better. For me, I like to have some bit of reference. If I'm drawing different characters in a scene, I know drawing these stick figures and even just these rough shapes are here will be hard to figure out who's who unless we have a clear idea of that. So sometimes I'll draw, the character's name above it or their initial. That way I know like this is gonna be this character, and I need to prepare to have like maybe a character with a sword in the background or a character with a extra voluminous hair. I don't want them to collide with each other, so it's just one of the things to keep in mind when making a group shot. So we're gonna go ahead and time lapse again. Alright, now that everything's a bit cleaned up, I do want to make a quick note of clarifying what I mean when I talk about anatomy. Quite a bit of artists, quite a bit of guides, even myself will just throw out the term anatomy over and over again, but it doesn't actually, I guess, tell you what I'm specifically mean about that. So for anatomy, it's learning about the bone structures, the placement of these bones, the proportion of shapes to another. There are quite a bit of guides online where you can find, I've seen one before that has the entire proportions of the face, which is like including some weird, I guess, bits of information where the pupil of the eye aligns directly with the corner of the mouth, or how the nose sits right between the bottoms of the ears and the eyebrows lines up at the tops of the ears. It's just things like that, little bits of key information that comes with anatomy that'll help you in establishing guidelines and establishing proportions and more of a direction to look for in terms of talking about anatomy. So another one too is drawing a bit of a rib cage here on this creature in the bottom. We can find out, this is where the ribs will go, this is where the sternum will go, this is where the collarbone will go, and etc., etc. The number of ribs doesn't really matter too much, again, unless you're drawing like a skeletal character. But again, being able to drill the shapes of the muscles, of the bones into your memory is definitely going to help when recalling where the placements of these things go. So for example, the names are not too necessary, but learning how to break things down into shapes as well. So for example, on the shoulder here, we can draw the deltoid, and a bit more definition here if we wanted to. We can draw the tricep right here, bicep right here, elbow, forearm, and add more detail to this limb here. And that's again what anatomy can help you do. It's to identify what goes where and how it will affect your drawing by adding more detail and adding the, I guess, the contours of your characters or creatures. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding some rough details here, and we'll come back after we get some of them down. Okay. So the first one I tackled here is the stone Chwinga, or the earth elemental one. And what I did was I kind of used a lot of blocky and hard outline shapes, like a lot of hard angles and edges. So that's going to give the impression this guy's kind of made out of a rougher material than the others. And you'll see when I get to them what I mean by that. But again, I added maybe a bit of pebbles along the arm, along the waist, the thighs, and I kind of made it more like it's a possibly some sort of creature that has skin beneath where the rocks will go on the bony parts of the arms. But again, for function over form, I kind of wanted to allow him to bend his elbow and his shoulder and his legs. And if I were to make the entire creature out of stone, while you could do that, and some more expert artists are able to make that work, for me it's a bit easier if I'm able to just free up those limbs. That way the creature makes sense to me right away, instead of having to tackle the more difficult parts of how to make every single limb movable with stone over it. So I'm gonna go ahead and outline this guy and get started on the next one. Okay. Our little fire Chwinga is going to be a bit easier to draw for the most part, because he's going to be just pretty much open flame. So for this one, for making flame techniques, I have a bit of a trick. What I like to do is alternating waves, and if you look really closely at this art, you'll see it in a number of places when it comes to fire. So what I do is I'll make the first kind of wave outwards, and then I'll immediately direct it back in, and then outwards, and then back in, then outwards, then back in, then outwards, in, out, in. And that's it's kind of how I attain the illusion of fire. And it works relatively well. It's been served me very well for the past couple of years. I've not had to adapt from that trick, so go ahead and give it a try if you have trouble making fire, and see how that works for you. I'm going to go ahead and get started on the next one, which is going to be this air guy. Since he's a bit more in the background, I can draw him now that I have these two characters blocked out. For the air Chwinga, I used a bit more freedom with the lines here, and you'll see that I kind of did a little bit of my fire technique, but the difference in the texture you can see is more of a where and how long these wisp trails will end up being. So you can see for the hair of this one, I guess you can call it, it's very controlled, it's very proportionate, it's all next to each other. There's about the same distance between the top of the fire to the bottom of the fire. But for the air one, it just kind of goes every which way. It's free, it's unrestrained, and I think that gives the impression of how air would look. So the reason why I chose diamond shapes for accenting the kneecaps and the shoulders is because I think the rough shape outlines contrast very well with the free flowing lines. That allows you to quite clearly see, you know, both the character and the effects of the character's element. So moving on, we're going to go ahead and do the grass one on the far right, and we'll do the water guy afterwards. So I just want to mention that the grass one that I'm going to do right here, I'm going to do pretty much straight from the source book, because I think it's fair to do that one justice as well, because I really like that design. This one is pretty much what you'll find whenever you look up things about Chwinga, but I decided to tackle a bit of the elemental ones as well, just to get a feel for, you know, potential that these guys can have. So okay. For this grass one on the side, you might have noticed that I almost completely covered up every single limb that I just carefully drew. So that's another cool thing, that when you do your poses beforehand, you have an idea of where your body's going to be, as well as what protruding shapes you need to do. Like, say if he was wearing a heavy cloak or some kind of, you know, thick outfit, it's going to help you to find out where the bends should be roughly based on where these limbs are going to be placed, even if you don't actually end up drawing the limbs afterwards. We got a nice effect that allows us to show more of the broom slash mop shape of this Chwinga here by allowing it to drape over his knees that are sticking out, protruding from where the bulk of his body would be. So moving along from that one, we're going to go ahead and finish up with the water Chwinga. So when rendering water, I feel as if it's one of the most trickiest, I guess, textures to draw, in the sense that water when done incorrectly starts to look like goo, and water when done very correctly is just a, I don't know if there's a trick to attain that. I have not yet found it, so I've definitely seen some artists that are very skilled in drawing water, but that's one of the skills that I wish to get better at as well. For me, I just kind of used gravity to my advantage here, being that its elbows resting on its leg. I kind of have a bit of it dripping off, I guess you could say, as well as where its feet would go, and the other leg is almost completely melded into the base that it's sitting on, as well as fusing with its other arm. So I guess that kind of gives the impression of a water figure, but it's also, again, one of the things that I said is can be quite difficult to master, so that's definitely one that's going to require quite a bit of practice and a lot of reference. So I'm just about done here, and the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and give these characters one more go over with outlines, and then go ahead and try to, I guess, finish up our background scene, which is just adding more detail into the background, the ground, trees, etc. Okay. I think that just about does it here. So I guess this video does quite a bit of things in showing different techniques on rendering different types of materials. As always, reference and a lot of practice is going to help you get to a point where you feel comfortable with how you rendered things. So it's always helpful just to look at different pictures of how people did, a drawing of fire, how they did a drawing of water, rocks, of branches and trees and stuff. So that's, again, if you need practice drawing certain things like that, it's always helpful to go ahead and look up somehow pictures of these things to determine how you can best imitate that and draw it in your own way. So here you go, the Challenge Rank 0 monster, episode number 5, the Chwinga. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for next time.